What if I told you that somewhere in the dusty pages of forgotten history lies the name of a woman who defied time itself? A woman who, no matter how many years passed, never seemed to grow old. Her skin remained smooth, her face untouched by the wrinkles of time, and her presence seemed to mock the very laws of nature. Would you believe me? Or would you dismiss it as nothing more than another ghost story, another urban legend whispered in the dark? But tonight, let's open the book of the past. Let's turn the fragile pages of a diary written in the year 1863, where the first mention of Elizabeth Caldwell appears, and with it, the beginning of one of the strangest mysteries science has never been able to explain. In a small town, nestled in the heart of 19th century America, a weathered leather-bound journal was discovered in the ruins of an old house. Its cover was cracked, its pages yellowed, but its words were still legible. And inside that book was a name: Elizabeth Caldwell. The handwriting trembled, as though the writer had been consumed with fear while putting ink to paper. The entry read, "She does not change. The years pass, but her face remains the same. The same eyes, the same smile, as though time itself dares not touch her." Who was this woman? Was she merely a villager, caught in the imagination of others? Or was there truly something extraordinary about her? As we dig deeper into the diary, one thing becomes clear. Elizabeth Caldwell was no ordinary person. The diary continues to describe her in unsettling detail. How she appeared in the town records as early as 1840, yet in the year 1863, she looked no older than 25. How mothers in the town would whisper to their children not to stare at her, for fear that her gaze might curse them. How men who once courted her grew old and grey, while she remained untouched by time. One villager wrote in disbelief, "It is as though she is carved from the very stone of eternity. She does not wither, she does not fade. God forgive me, but I think she may be immortal." Immortal. A word too dangerous, too powerful to be spoken lightly in the 19th century. For to accuse someone of such a thing was to accuse them of witchcraft, of dealing with forces forbidden and dark, and yet the whispers grew louder. The diary describes a chilling event. In the summer of 1863, a great gathering took place in the town square. People spoke openly of Elizabeth Caldwell. They debated, they argued, they feared. How could one woman resist the passing of time? Some claimed she had found an elixir of life, some ancient potion hidden in the old forests. Others believed she had sold her soul to something unholy in exchange for eternal youth. And then there were those who thought she was a blessing, a divine miracle sent to prove that heaven was real. But one truth remained: she did not age. Imagine it for yourself. Imagine living in a time when life expectancy barely crossed 40. When sickness, war, and famine claimed lives far too soon. Imagine watching your neighbors grow old, your family wrinkle and bend with age, while one woman, always present, remains unchanged. Would you see her as a miracle or a monster? The diary writer, whose name is never revealed, admits that he followed Elizabeth for weeks. He recorded her habits. She walked the same roads, greeted the same people, attended the same Sunday church service. She laughed, she cried, she prayed. She lived like any other woman, but still, her face never changed. One line in the diary chills the blood more than any other. It says, "On the day her own daughter turned 50, Elizabeth looked no older than she did at 25. They walked together in the market, and strangers mistook them for sisters." Let that sink in. Her own daughter, wrinkled with age, standing beside her mother who looked like her younger sibling. How is such a thing possible? As we stand here more than a century later, with all our science, our technology, our understanding of biology and genetics, we still cannot explain how a human being could defy aging so completely. And yet there it is, in ink and paper, written by those who lived and breathed in 1863. They saw her, they feared her, they could not explain her. The journal ends its first entry with words that still echo across the decades. If Elizabeth Caldwell is not of this world, then may God protect us all, for she walks among us, but she is not like us. So here is the question, dear listener. Do you believe in legends? Do you believe that time can be cheated? That death can be delayed? That the human body can resist the march of years? Or do you think this was nothing more than a trick of memory, a case of mistaken identity, a story grown larger with each retelling? The answer lies hidden in that small town, buried beneath the weight of centuries. And yet, as we turn the page to the next chapter of this mystery, one thing becomes clear. The name Elizabeth Caldwell will not be forgotten, because she may be the woman who never aged. Before we dive deeper into the whispers and the mysteries surrounding Elizabeth Caldwell, let us pause for a moment and simply ask the question, who was she really? Was she a sorceress cloaked in shadows, as some feared, or just an ordinary woman trapped inside an extraordinary secret she never asked for? Elizabeth Caldwell was born in the early 1800s in a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names. The kind of place where gossip traveled faster than the wind, where a neighbor's smile or frown could shape your reputation for years. Her family was simple, hard-working, and by all accounts respectable. Her father was a craftsman, known for his steady hands and honest work. Her mother, a devoted homemaker, raised Elizabeth and her siblings with discipline and faith. Elizabeth grew up like many young women of her time, helping with household chores, attending church every Sunday, and dreaming perhaps of love and a family of her own. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about her life. And maybe that is what makes her story so haunting. Because Elizabeth Caldwell looked, walked, and lived as any other woman of the 19th century. But somewhere along the line, she began to separate from the rest. Not through choice, but through something far stranger. In her youth, Elizabeth was admired. People remembered her as a woman of striking beauty, dark hair that fell in gentle waves, eyes that seemed to carry both warmth and mystery, and a smile that could disarm even the harshest critic. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't noble, but she carried herself with a grace that made her unforgettable. By the age of 20, she married a man named Thomas Caldwell, a schoolteacher with gentle manners and a sharp mind. Together, they started a family. They had children, they built a home, they celebrated Christmases and birthdays just like everyone else in town. To the outside world, Elizabeth's life was the picture of simplicity and contentment. But as the years rolled forward, something began to feel wrong. Neighbors noticed it first in passing. At gatherings, when women compared their tired faces in the mirror, Elizabeth seemed to stand apart. While their skin slowly gave way to wrinkles, Elizabeth's remained untouched. While their hair faded with streaks of silver, hers remained dark and full. At first, people praised her. She takes such good care of herself. Surely she eats better than the rest of us. Perhaps it's simply good luck or strong family genes. But as the decades stretched onward, admiration turned into unease. Imagine being her neighbor. Imagine watching your own children grow into adults, while Elizabeth's face, the same face you saw 20 years ago, remains unchanged. Would you smile at her, or would you begin to look at her differently? Her family life only deepened the mystery. Thomas Caldwell grew older, his hair receding, his hands trembling with age. Yet standing beside him was Elizabeth, looking like his much younger bride, frozen in time. When their first child reached adulthood, townsfolk whispered how Elizabeth could be mistaken for her daughter's sister. By the time her daughter had grandchildren of her own, Elizabeth looked as though she had barely crossed into her 30s. To the Caldwell children, this was both a blessing and a curse. They adored their mother, but they could not ignore what everyone else saw. A woman who should have been aging alongside her family, yet never did. To them, she was both mother and mystery. Of course, in a small 19th century town, mysteries rarely stayed private. People speculated, people judged, people feared. The gossip spread faster than fire. Some said Elizabeth bathed in strange herbal mixtures at night. Others swore they saw her in the woods, speaking to shadows when the moon was high. There were whispers of witchcraft, whispers of secret pacts, whispers of forbidden knowledge. But through it all, Elizabeth herself remained silent. By every account, she was kind. She attended church. She cared for her children. She helped her neighbors. There was no record of cruelty, no sign of wickedness. She was a good wife, a good mother, a good friend. And yet, her very existence unsettled those around her, because she was living proof of something no one could explain. One story tells of a family portrait taken when Elizabeth was about 50 years old. In the photograph, Thomas Caldwell appears as an aging man, his shoulders bent, his face lined with years of struggle. Their grown children, too, bear the marks of adulthood. But Elizabeth, standing in the center of the frame, looks like a young woman beside them. When strangers looked upon that picture, they refused to believe she was the mother. They thought she was a newlywed bride, perhaps a second wife. But no, it was the same Elizabeth. And that is where the fear began to grow. Because what people cannot explain, they often choose to fear. By the mid-1800s, Elizabeth had become a paradox in her community. To some, she was a miracle, a sign of God's hand at work. To others, she was a danger, a curse waiting to unfold. She lived surrounded by love and suspicion in equal measure, but through it all, she never aged. She was a mother. She was a wife. She was a neighbor. She was in every way an ordinary woman, and yet, her reflection in the mirror told a story no one else could understand. So, who was Elizabeth Caldwell? An innocent woman with a strange gift? Or a hidden enigma carrying a secret that even her own family could not explain? One thing is certain. By the time the town began to truly realize what was happening, Elizabeth's name was already turning from that of a housewife into that of a legend. At first, no one thought much of it. Beauty and youth were blessings people admired, not questioned. When Elizabeth Caldwell reached her 30s and still looked as radiant as the day she was married, her friends would laugh and say she had been kissed by fortune. Some whispered that her glowing skin was the result of good care, or that she simply ate healthier food than the rest. After all, in those times, hard labor and poor diets aged people quickly. Perhaps Elizabeth was just lucky. But as the years slipped away, luck no longer seemed to explain it. 20 years passed. Children who once played in the dirt streets were now grown men with families of their own. Women who were once Elizabeth's companions had lines around their eyes, gray in their hair, and stiffness in their bones. Yet Elizabeth looked unchanged, her face smooth, her dark hair untouched by streaks of white, her body still moving with the grace of youth. Imagine the shock of those who hadn't seen her in years. Travelers who left the town and returned after a decade would look upon her with disbelief. "Elizabeth Caldwell?" they would ask. "But how? You look just as you did the day I left." Their voices carried awe, but beneath the awe was unease. Human beings expect time to leave its mark, and when it does not, something feels wrong. One villager wrote of an encounter at the marketplace. Elizabeth was buying apples, laughing with the merchant, when a woman approached her. The woman, once Elizabeth's childhood friend, had grown old and frail, and she reached out to touch Elizabeth's cheek with trembling fingers and whispered, "You haven't changed, not one bit. Do you remember me?" Elizabeth smiled warmly and said, "Of course I do." But the old friend could only shake her head in disbelief. "Then why do you look younger than my granddaughter?" Such moments unsettled people. What began as admiration slowly twisted into something darker. For every kind word Elizabeth received about her beauty, there were whispers behind her back. She is not natural. She is hiding something. This is not the way of God. The small town began to watch her more carefully. Every laugh, every glance, every movement was weighed with suspicion. Elizabeth herself seemed unbothered. She lived quietly, cared for her husband and children, and continued her daily routines. If she noticed the stares, the whispers, she gave no sign. Some believed she didn't even realize how unusual she was. Others thought she knew the truth, but kept it buried in silence. But silence does not calm suspicion. It feeds it. As the seasons passed, the gap between Elizabeth and everyone around her grew starker. At gatherings, photographs showed rows of weary faces, but Elizabeth's smile gleamed as if frozen in time. At weddings, she stood among women younger than her, yet looked younger still. At funerals, she mourned with the families, but her youthful face only deepened the pain for those who watched their loved ones fade, while she remained the same. There is a story, often retold, of a Sunday service where Elizabeth sat beside her eldest daughter. The preacher's wife leaned over to a visitor and whispered, "The mother is the younger one. You can see it in her eyes." The visitor laughed, thinking it was a joke, until he realized it wasn't. Elizabeth's daughter, nearly 50, looked every bit her age. Elizabeth, her mother, appeared to be in her 20s. The realization silenced the visitor, who later swore he had never seen anything so unnatural in all his life. Shock turned to fear. Parents began warning their children not to linger near her. Young men who once admired her beauty now crossed the street to avoid her gaze. Some claimed that her eternal youth must have come at a terrible cost, that she had bargained with forces beyond human comprehension. They whispered of curses, of rituals performed under the pale moonlight, of secret bloodlines not meant for ordinary men and women, and yet there were others who admired her all the more. To them, Elizabeth was proof of hope, a living miracle. They believed she had been chosen by God, preserved as a sign of something divine. Pilgrims came from neighboring towns just to catch a glimpse of her, to see for themselves the woman who seemed to laugh at time. Some even asked her to share her secret, pleaded with her to tell them how they, too, could escape the cruelty of aging. Elizabeth never gave them answers. She would only smile softly and say, "I live as you do. I eat. I sleep. I pray. There is no secret." But for those who had seen the years march on in everyone but her, those words rang hollow. The turning point came during a community festival. Families gathered in the town square, children ran with ribbons, music filled the air. Among the crowd, Elizabeth danced with her daughter's grandchildren, children who looked at her and called her grandmother, though to anyone watching she looked more like their young aunt. People whispered as they watched her spin in the lantern light, her face glowing as though untouched by age. "This is wrong," one villager muttered. "She defies the order of nature." Another said, "It is beautiful, but it frightens me." That night, as the festival ended, an older woman approached Elizabeth. Her voice trembled with both reverence and fear as she asked, "Tell me, child, what are you?" Elizabeth's smile faded. For the first time, those who witnessed the exchange claimed to see a shadow of sorrow cross her face. She replied quietly, "I am only Elizabeth, nothing more." But by then the whispers had grown too loud to silence. The first signs of her agelessness had revealed themselves, and they could not be ignored. What once seemed like a blessing now looked like a riddle carved into flesh and bone. Friends who once loved her now feared her, neighbors who once welcomed her now avoided her, and yet she remained unchanged. As the town aged, Elizabeth Caldwell stood still, like a portrait that refused to fade. A living contradiction, a question without an answer. And deep within the pages of that old journal from 1863, the writer left a line that still chills the soul. "She lives among us, but she does not belong to us." At first, the townsfolk tried to explain Elizabeth Caldwell's strange youth with kindness. They told themselves it was good fortune, clean living, or the blessing of strong blood. But human nature is restless, and what cannot be explained by reason soon slips into the realm of fear, and fear breeds rumors. It began with hushed conversations behind closed doors, a neighbor leaning over to another at the Sunday service whispering, "Have you noticed? She hasn't changed since last year, or the year before, or the year before that." The other would nod, their eyes wide, but they would say nothing aloud. Because in a small town, suspicion spreads faster than wildfire. By the late 1860s, Elizabeth Caldwell was no longer simply admired or envied. She was talked about, feared, even by the very people who once welcomed her into their homes. The whispers carried many shapes, but none of them were kind. Some said she practiced witchcraft. They claimed they had seen her walking alone in the woods under the pale light of the moon, her hands stretched toward the sky as if she were calling upon unseen forces. They said animals avoided her path, that dogs growled when she passed by, and that birds fell silent when her shadow touched the earth. The more imaginative even insisted they had seen her eyes glow faintly in the dark, like embers hidden beneath ash. Others were certain she was cursed. They whispered that perhaps Elizabeth herself did not wish for eternal youth, but had been bound to it by some terrible fate. That maybe she had crossed paths with a spirit or angered God and now walked the earth untouched by age as punishment. To these people her beauty was not a blessing, it was a chain, binding her to an existence she could never escape. But there were those who feared something greater still, immortality. They believed Elizabeth Caldwell had discovered the secret of everlasting life. That somewhere in her past she had stumbled upon a hidden truth, an elixir, a ritual, a forbidden knowledge that none should ever hold. They argued that this was why she avoided explaining her condition, why she never confessed the source of her youth, for if she revealed it, others might try to claim it, and the world itself might unravel. Every whisper, every rumor chipped away at the town's trust. Friends became cautious, neighbors became distant. Where once she was greeted with warm smiles, Elizabeth now felt the weight of cautious stares. Imagine walking through streets you had known your entire life, only to feel the eyes of those you loved turn cold. Imagine hearing children sing cruel rhymes behind you, songs about witches who drink the blood of the young. Imagine knowing that no matter how much kindness you gave, suspicion grew like weeds in the cracks of every conversation. For Elizabeth, this became her reality. One account from the diary described a chilling night. A group of townsfolk gathered outside the Caldwell home, lanterns flickering in the dark, voices low and angry. They whispered accusations. Witch, demon, deceiver. They never acted, but their presence was enough to send a message. They no longer saw her as one of them. They saw her as other. And yet, what struck the writer most was Elizabeth's calm. She did not shout. She did not fight. She did not try to defend herself. She stood at her doorway, her face illuminated by the lantern glow, and simply said, "I am no different from you. I live, I breathe, I feel sorrow and joy. Do not fear me." But fear is not so easily quieted. The rumors grew wild, stretching far beyond the town itself. Travelers passing through would hear the tales of the woman who did not age and would linger in the hope of glimpsing her. Some were curious, others were terrified. A few even believed that touching her hand might bless them with her gift or curse them with her fate. And so, Elizabeth Caldwell became both legend and warning, a living myth while still alive. Yet the strangest part of all was this. Despite all the talk, no one could find proof of wrongdoing. She lived a simple life, raised her children, cared for her husband, and attended church. There were no strange rituals, no evidence of sorcery, no secret potions tucked away in her home. Only her face, unchanged year after year, century-defying in its stillness. But people do not need proof when they have fear. The diary tells of one winter night when a terrible storm swept through the town. Roofs collapsed under heavy snow, and families huddled together for warmth. In the morning, when the storm had passed, Elizabeth emerged from her home to help neighbors clear the wreckage. Yet instead of gratitude, some villagers whispered that she must have caused the storm. No natural sky would rage like that, they muttered, unless summoned. When a child fell ill and died despite the doctor's best efforts, there were murmurs that Elizabeth's presence was to blame. "Death should have touched her long ago," one mother spat, "and yet it comes for our children instead," and so fear turned to resentment. Elizabeth Caldwell was no longer just a mystery. She was a scapegoat. When crops failed, when storms struck, when tragedy fell upon the town, people looked for someone to blame. And the woman who never aged was the perfect target. But even as suspicion grew, there were those who still admired her. Young women envied her beauty. Young men dreamed of her company. Some believed she carried a divine blessing, proof that heaven touched earth through her. They defended her, argued against the accusations, begged others to see reason, yet the balance was shifting. The louder voices belonged to fear, and fear, once planted, grows roots that no truth can easily dig out. By the time the 1870s arrived, Elizabeth Caldwell was no longer simply a woman. She had become a story. To some, a story of envy. To others, a story of fear. And to a small few, perhaps a story of hope. But to everyone, she was something unnatural. And in a small town where belief ruled stronger than science, that made her dangerous. By the time Elizabeth Caldwell's story reached the ears of neighboring towns, it had already grown beyond rumor. It was no longer just idle gossip whispered by fearful neighbors. It was a phenomenon. Word spread that there lived a woman in America who had defied the laws of nature. A woman who, despite decades of life, still carried the face of youth and, in the age of discovery, when science was beginning to challenge superstition, such a claim could not be ignored. The 19th century was a time of great curiosity. Doctors were unraveling the mysteries of the human body. Biologists were cataloging species, and thinkers across Europe and America were daring to believe that all things, even the strangest of mysteries, could be explained. So when news of Elizabeth Caldwell began to circulate, physicians and scientists took interest. Some dismissed the tale as nonsense, the kind of exaggeration rural communities were prone to. But others felt compelled to see for themselves. One winter afternoon, a physician from a nearby city traveled to Elizabeth's town. His name has been lost to history, but the diary describes him as a tall man with sharp spectacles and sharper questions. He arrived not as a friend, but as an investigator. He had heard the whispers of witchcraft, of curses, of immortality, and he wanted truth. He visited the Caldwell home under the pretense of offering a routine medical examination. Elizabeth, polite and trusting, agreed. She allowed him to measure her pulse, inspect her eyes, listen to her heartbeat. He checked her skin, her joints, her hair, and every observation confounded him. Her pulse was steady, strong, exactly what one would expect from a woman in her 20s. Her skin bore no scars of time, no lines, no age spots, no frailty. Her hair was thick and dark, without the faintest strand of silver. Her teeth were healthy, her body free of the stiffness or pain that marked most women past 30. By all accounts, she was young. Perfectly, impossibly young. The doctor left with his notes baffled. He told the townsfolk that, medically speaking, Elizabeth Caldwell showed no signs of aging. Not fewer signs than normal, none at all. It was, in his words, as though the clock of her body has simply refused to move forward. The townsfolk were not comforted by this. Some nodded knowingly and said, "Then she truly is unnatural." Others whispered, "If science cannot explain her, then perhaps she is beyond science altogether." As the years passed, Elizabeth's legend reached even further. A group of traveling academics heard of her case and demanded written testimony. The anonymous diarist, the same who had recorded so many of her strange details, sent letters describing her appearance and the impossibility of her youth. Soon, more physicians came. Some traveled miles across rough roads just to lay eyes upon her. They conducted examinations, each more detailed than the last. Blood was drawn, samples were taken, notes scribbled feverishly. They compared her to her peers, to her children, even to her grandchildren, and every test yielded the same confounding result. Elizabeth Caldwell was biologically young. Her heart, her lungs, her muscles, her skin, every marker they measured spoke of a woman in the prime of her life. Yet her records, her family, her entire history confirmed she was far older. One doctor reportedly shook his head after a long day of examination and muttered, "Impossible, yet true." Medical records from that time, though scarce, describe Elizabeth in terms that sound almost modern. One account states, "The subject displays no degeneration of tissue, no loss of elasticity in the skin, no decay of the teeth. It is as though she has been frozen at a singular moment in her life and held there by some unseen hand." Another account speculated wildly. Perhaps her blood contains something unknown to us, a substance that resists decay. Perhaps her body repairs itself more perfectly than any other. And yet, these were only guesses. For all their instruments, for all their careful study, the doctors could not unlock her secret. Think of the frustration of those scientists, men who believed that every mystery had an answer, staring at a woman who should not exist, a woman who broke every rule of biology they knew. But perhaps the greatest mystery was Elizabeth herself. For, despite their questions, she never claimed to understand what was happening to her. She did not boast, she did not speculate. When asked, she would simply smile with sadness in her eyes and say, "I am only living as God allows." That answer satisfied no one. Some doctors left angry, convinced she was deceiving them somehow. They accused her of trickery, of lying about her age, of falsifying records. But her family, her children, her grandchildren, all testified to the truth. They had lived alongside her, watched the years roll by, and could not deny what their own eyes had seen. Others left haunted, muttering to themselves, shaken to the core. For they had faced something they could not categorize, something that defied the very foundation of their beliefs. and so science, for all its ambition, was forced to admit defeat. Elizabeth Caldwell remained a riddle. The townsfolk, however, saw things differently. Each failed attempt by science only deepened their fear. If even the learned men cannot explain her, they whispered, then she must not belong to this world. Some believed she was divine. Others believed she was damned, but no one believed she was ordinary. And Elizabeth? She continued as always. She cooked, she prayed, she tended to her family. While doctors scratched their heads and townsfolk whispered, she lived day by day, as though nothing were unusual at all. Perhaps that was the strangest part of all, that the woman who baffled science, who terrified her neighbors, remained so calm, so human. She laughed, she cried, she bled, she mourned. She was not a statue of stone or an angel untouched by sorrow. She was a woman, and yet she was not. By the end of the 19th century, Elizabeth Caldwell had been examined by more than a few doctors. Each left with pages of notes but no answers. Each tried to explain, but failed. And the phrase most often left in their journals, their reports, their trembling letters to colleagues was the same. Impossible, yet true. When science failed to explain Elizabeth Caldwell, the human imagination rushed to fill the void. For if the doctors and scholars, the men of knowledge and reason, could not unravel her mystery, then surely something greater, something stranger, must be at work. And so theories began to take shape. Theories born of fear, hope, faith, and superstition. The first and most common whispers were mythical. People in the 19th century lived with legends at their fingertips, tales of witches, curses, and forbidden powers passed down from generations. To them, Elizabeth's timeless face was not a medical marvel but a warning. Some claimed she was a witch. They said she had struck a deal with dark forces, sacrificing something, perhaps her soul, perhaps the lives of others, in exchange for eternal youth. They recalled how animals sometimes turned away from her, how storms seemed to arrive after she walked the fields, how her shadow stretched long in the evening light. To a fearful eye, these were not coincidences. They were signs, whispers told, of midnight rituals, of potions brewed in secret, of spells spoken under her breath. No one ever caught her doing such things, yet the absence of proof only fueled belief. After all, if she had truly made a pact with darkness, would she not also have the power to hide it? Others believed in the elixir of life. They spoke of ancient alchemists who sought a potion to defeat time, a drink that could freeze the body in youth forever. Perhaps Elizabeth had discovered such a secret, hidden in a family recipe or passed to her in a dream. Some said she had been seen carrying a flask of clear liquid, sipping it in the quiet of the night. What if that was the elixir itself? What if every drop she drank kept her young another year? And yet, no flask was ever found. No recipe ever uncovered. Only whispers. Only questions. Then came the scientific theories. Even as doctors shook their heads in confusion, some believed Elizabeth's mystery could still be explained by the natural world. Perhaps they suggested she carried within her blood a unique gift, an anomaly of genetics, a code unlike any other, passed down by chance or fate that allowed her body to repair itself endlessly. Today, we might call it a mutation, a rare, unrepeatable miracle of biology. But in the 19th century, genetics was only beginning to be understood. For them, it was speculation, but speculation that carried weight. Others wondered if she suffered from a disease unknown to medicine, a condition so rare it reversed the effects of aging or slowed them to a near halt. Some even thought her body might have found a way to resist time at the cellular level, though no one could prove it, and no one else showed such signs. One physician wrote in frustration, "Her body appears normal, yet it refuses the passage of years." It is as though she is a clock that ticks but never moves forward. Was it science not yet discovered? Or something beyond the reach of science altogether? And then there were the spiritual explanations. For many in her community, Elizabeth's youth was not the work of potions or blood, but of heaven or hell. Some believed she was blessed. They saw her as a living miracle, chosen by God to reveal his power to mankind. To them, her unchanging face was a sign of divine protection, proof that eternity was real. Pilgrims sometimes came just to see her, to touch her hand, to pray in her presence. They asked her to bless their children, believing her touch carried healing, longevity, perhaps even salvation. But not all saw a blessing. To others, her existence was a curse. They argued that no mortal should live untouched by time, that God himself had denied her the peace of aging. Some believed she was marked for punishment, that her soul was trapped in a body that could not change, forced to outlive everyone she loved as a form of eternal sorrow. To them, her youthful face was not beautiful. It was terrifying. Each theory tried to explain Elizabeth Caldwell: witchcraft, alchemy, genetics, unknown disease, divine blessing, eternal curse, and yet none of them truly satisfied. Each raised as many questions as it answered. If she was a witch, where was the proof? If she drank an elixir, why did no one else ever find it? If she carried unique genetics, why was she the only one? If it was a disease, why did it not weaken her, as diseases usually do? If she was blessed, why was she shunned? If she was cursed, why did she not despair? The truth was, no one knew. No one could know. Elizabeth herself never claimed an answer. When asked, she would lower her eyes and whisper, "I live as I was made." Some took that as confession, others as evasion. But always it left people unsatisfied, and so the theories multiplied. Each person shaped her mystery into what they feared or what they hoped or what they needed to believe. But one thing never changed. No matter the theory, no matter the explanation, Elizabeth Caldwell remained what she had always been: impossible, and yet undeniably real. And with every passing year, as her neighbors aged and died, as her children grew old before her eyes, one question grew louder than all others. Was Elizabeth Caldwell truly timeless? Or was she the victim of a secret the world was never meant to understand? By the year Elizabeth Caldwell turned 60, the whispers in her town had grown into something far greater. What had once been quiet curiosity had become open astonishment, and what had once been rumors had become accusations. Because by then, the difference was undeniable. At 60, most women of her time were frail, their faces lined with decades of labor, their hands marked by toil. Many did not live so long. Yet Elizabeth still carried the face of a woman no older than 25. Her skin was smooth, her hair rich and dark, her eyes bright and sharp. She walked with a youthful grace that seemed almost cruel beside her children, who now appeared older than their mother. Neighbors would glance from Elizabeth to her grown son, his beard streaked with grey, and shiver. They would look at her daughters, their faces lined with age, and whisper, "How can this be? How can the mother look younger than the child?" But it was not until tragedy struck that Elizabeth's secret became a matter of investigation. One autumn evening, a fire tore through the town. The exact cause was never known. Some said a lantern tipped, others claimed a lightning strike, but the blaze spread quickly, devouring homes and barns in its path. Families rushed into the streets, clutching children, dragging buckets of water that did little against the hungry flames. Elizabeth was among them. She ran through the smoke, helping neighbors escape, guiding the old and the weak to safety. Witnesses later said she moved with unnatural speed, her body unaffected by the choking air that left others gasping. And then came the moment no one forgot. A section of a burning roof collapsed onto a man trapped inside. The crowd screamed, certain he was lost, but Elizabeth, without hesitation, rushed into the inferno. For long moments, she disappeared into the flames. Those watching prayed or wept, believing she too had been consumed. And then, she emerged, carrying the man upon her back, her dress singed, her hands blackened with soot, but her face untouched. No burns, no blisters, not even a scar. The man survived, though badly injured. Elizabeth, however, walked away as though fire itself could not touch her. From that night forward, her mystery was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. How can she remain unharmed? The people asked. How can 60 years pass and leave no mark upon her? How can fire itself fail to wound her? Some said the fire had revealed her true nature. She is not mortal, they whispered. She is something else entirely. Others claimed it was proof of witchcraft, that the devil himself had shielded her from the flames. A few, more hopeful, declared her an angel sent to protect them. But the town could not agree, and with every disagreement, suspicion deepened. Not long after, an investigation was demanded. Local leaders, elders, priests, even a magistrate, gathered to question her. Elizabeth was summoned to the town hall, where the entire community crowded inside. She stood before them, her posture calm, her expression steady. She looked like a young woman defending herself, yet everyone knew she had lived 60 long years. Elizabeth Caldwell, one elder asked, "How do you explain your condition?" She answered simply, "I cannot. I am as you see me. I live. I breathe. I bleed. I pray. I am no different from you." But they pressed harder. "Why do you not age? Why did the fire not harm you? What power protects you?" And always, Elizabeth replied the same. "I do not know." Her words did nothing to satisfy them. In fact, they only fueled the fear. Because if she could not explain herself, then perhaps the explanation was something unspeakable. Witnesses described that moment as chilling. Elizabeth stood in the hall surrounded by her children, men and women with gray in their hair, wrinkles in their faces, while she looked younger than all of them. It was a sight that shook even the most skeptical hearts. A priest muttered, "It is against God's order for a mother to outlive her children in appearance." Others crossed themselves as though in defense against evil. One man shouted from the crowd, "She is immortal." Another spat back, "No, she is cursed." The arguments erupted into chaos, the town divided, suspicion now burning hotter than the fire that had started it all. Elizabeth said nothing more. She bowed her head, stood silently as the voices raged around her, and then quietly walked out of the hall. After that night, the way people looked at her changed forever. She was no longer just Elizabeth, the helpful neighbor, the kind mother, the woman who cooked and prayed like anyone else. She was the woman who would not age, the woman who walked through fire, the woman no tragedy could touch. Some respected her more deeply, seeing her as chosen by fate. Others feared her more intensely, believing her to be an omen of doom. But one thing was certain. Her life would never again be ordinary. Imagine for a moment living in that town, seeing your neighbor grow older, weaker, more fragile with each passing year, while Elizabeth Caldwell remained frozen in youth. Would you admire her? Would you envy her? Or would you fear her? Because on that night of fire, Elizabeth's secret was no longer hidden. It stood blazing in the open, undeniable, unforgettable, and from then on, her life and her mystery would never be the same. And then, she was gone. No warning, no farewell, no grave, no body. One morning, the town awoke to find Elizabeth Caldwell had vanished. Her home was still there. her belongings untouched. The bed she had slept in neatly made, as though she had risen in the night and walked away. But Elizabeth herself, this woman who had lived 60 years with the face of 25, had disappeared without a trace. Her children searched. Neighbors combed the woods. Some believed she had run away, hiding herself to escape the endless suspicion. Others feared something darker, that she had finally been taken, claimed by the same mystery that had allowed her to defy time. But no, one found her. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing. It was as though she had stepped out of her home and out of the world entirely. For days, the town buzzed with speculation. Rumors spread faster than the fire that had once consumed their barns. Some whispered she had been kidnapped by scientists eager to study her. Others claimed she had been taken by the devil himself. Still others said she had grown tired of mortal life and wandered away to live forever in solitude. But then, just when hope had begun to fade, a discovery was made. Inside a small wooden chest at the foot of her bed, among folded linens and faded photographs, lay a single object. An old letter. The letter was written in Elizabeth's own hand, the ink faded, but legible. It was not addressed to anyone in particular. It read almost like a confession, or perhaps a warning. The words, as recorded in the diary, were these: "I do not know what I am, only that I am not as others. I have prayed for answers, but heaven is silent. I have searched for cures, but there is none. Time passes around me, but not through me. I am a river stone against which the years break and scatter. I cannot tell if this is gift or curse. I only know it is lonely. If one day I leave, do not follow. The path I walk is not for others." And at the bottom, a final haunting line: "Perhaps the end is not death, but disappearance." The letter only deepened the mystery. What did she mean by "the path I walk is not for others"? Did she choose to leave? Was she forced? Did she know something the rest of the world could not? No one could agree. Her children clutched the letter in grief. To them it was her farewell, her way of saying she could no longer bear the life she had been given. But the townsfolk read it differently. Some saw it as proof of the supernatural, that Elizabeth herself had admitted she was not of this world. Others saw it as confession, that she had been cursed all along and finally surrendered to it, and a few, perhaps the most faithful, believed she had been taken by God, not in death, but in ascension. But what haunted them most was not the letter itself. It was the absence that followed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still no sign of her. The fields grew, the seasons changed, her children aged further. But Elizabeth Caldwell never returned. No body was found. No remains, no relics, not even a single footprint leading away from the home she left behind. It was as if she had been erased from the earth. And with her disappearance, the legend only grew stronger. Imagine the silence that followed in that town. Imagine walking past the Caldwell home, its windows dark, its garden untended, knowing the woman who once stood there had simply vanished. Would you believe she had run away? Would you believe she had been taken? Or would you wonder, as many did, whether she had never truly been human at all? Years later, travelers passing through the region still heard the tale. Some claimed to see a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, wandering roads far from the town. A woman who looked no older than 25, yet carried the sadness of someone much older. Was it Elizabeth? Was it imagination? No one ever proved it. But the sightings continued, scattered across decades, always the same description, always the same impossibility. The diary closes its account of Elizabeth with a final chilling note. The strangest mystery is not that she did not age, but that she did not die. In the end, she did not pass away as mortals do. She simply ceased to be among us, leaving only questions where answers should have been. And so the mystery of Elizabeth Caldwell only deepened. Was she immortal? Was she cursed? Or had she finally reached the true end of her strange condition, a disappearance instead of death? Her story left behind no resolution, only a letter, only a memory, and an emptiness where a woman once stood, young forever, yet gone without a trace. Though Elizabeth Caldwell vanished more than a century ago, her story refused to vanish with her. The townsfolk who had once known her grew old, died, and were buried. But their memories, their testimonies, and above all, the diary that recorded her strange life, survived. Passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, her tale grew roots far deeper than the small community she once called home. Elizabeth Caldwell became a legend. In the early 20th century, researchers uncovered scattered references to her in archives and church records. Old census documents listed her age, but baffled historians with the contradictions. 60 years old on paper, but described in eyewitness accounts as looking 25. Letters written by local officials described her as a phenomenon beyond comprehension. Soon her name began to appear in collections of folklore. Some labeled her the woman who never aged. Others called her the Immortal of 1863. Writers and storytellers embellished the tale, adding details that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Some claimed she had been seen in different parts of the world long after her disappearance. Others suggested she had faked her identity and lived on under new names, and always the question returned: who or what was Elizabeth Caldwell? Historians tried to frame her as a symbol of the unknown. Perhaps, they said, she was a victim of record-keeping errors, or perhaps her family exaggerated her youthfulness. But their explanations always rang hollow. Too many witnesses, too many consistent descriptions, too many details aligned across sources. Scientists, too, became curious. In the mid-20th century, when genetics began to unlock the secrets of heredity, Elizabeth's name surfaced once more. Could she have been a genetic anomaly, a one-in-a-billion miracle whose DNA resisted aging? Could her body have held the secret to immortality, one science might unlock if only her remains could be studied? But there were no remains, no grave, no body, only the diary and the legends. Still, her story appeared in journals and discussions. Some researchers cited her as an example of unexplained biological anomalies. Others dismissed her as myth. Yet even those who doubted admitted uneasily that the consistency of her story was unsettling. And then came the age of the internet. With the spread of information, Elizabeth Caldwell's legend reached new audiences. Articles, blogs, podcasts, and documentaries revisited her tale. Some treated her as a historical mystery. Others placed her alongside myths of vampires, immortals, and supernatural beings. In forums, people debated endlessly. Was she real? Was she an exaggerated story? Or could she have been the key to something science has yet to discover? The fascination only grew as modern science revealed more about the aging process. Researchers discovered genes linked to longevity, studied the cells that repair themselves, and even began experimenting with extending lifespan. Each new breakthrough sparked the same thought. Could Elizabeth Caldwell have been a living example of what humans might one day achieve? Yet for every theory there was always the same problem: no evidence, no body, no sample of her blood or hair, nothing to prove or disprove the legend. But her legacy did not end in science alone. Artists painted her, authors wrote novels inspired by her life. Filmmakers crafted stories of women who never aged, drawing from her tale as their muse. She became both a mystery and a metaphor, a reminder of humanity's obsession with youth and the eternal question of mortality. For some, Elizabeth Caldwell symbolized hope, proof that immortality might be possible. For others, she symbolized warning that to escape aging is to escape the natural order, and that such a gift would come with unbearable loneliness. Her letter, preserved in the diary, was often quoted by writers and philosophers. Time passes, around me but not through me. To many it read like poetry, to others like a lament.